Hey everybody, welcome back to the Historian's Wardrobe YouTube channel. I'm Mariana, and I have actually taken the last couple of weeks off from filming and posting content, mostly because I've just been dealing with some stuff in my personal life. So I have taken that little break, but I missed editing, I missed filming stuff and like getting content out there because it really helps to build a network in the community around me. And it's really cool, some of the people that I've gotten to meet just through doing this. I have been still working on projects even though I haven't been filming. I did film the progress while I was making stuff. So I have actually been working on projects. And one of those projects has kind of been the main one for the last couple of weeks. I've actually been working on this lovely 18th century stay, and the stay has been way more time and effort than I was anticipating. I way over calculated. I was thinking, I'm a pretty fast seamstress. I can make things quickly. I'll have it done in a week. No, it's been 3 weeks. Yeah, and I'm not done. So I'm actually on the hand stitching part, and I'm hand stitching all of the binding tape, and that is the one thing on the stay that is not historically correct. I have been trying to make it as historically correct as I could just because I love that challenge. It's fun for me. And so I actually have done all the hand stitching for this part. I didn't hand stitch the channels for the boning because that's a lot of hand stitching. A lot. Like, there are some girls who do it and more power to them. I'm not that patient, so I didn't do that. But I did hand stitch all of the binding tape to the edges, and I also did all my basting stitches by hand, but that's easy. I've been working on this for the past 3 weeks, way more time, but it has great historic accuracy. So being an 18th century corset, being an 18th century stay, I wanted to use the materials that they would have used. So I actually used 100% cotton canvas. So this is just a canvas fabric that I got at Joann's. And the pattern did call for an interfacing. So I could have done the iron-on interfacing and it would have been more like stiff. But I actually just used a cotton muslin because I had it trying to use stuff that I already had. And so I used just cotton muslin as the interlining, and then the lining that actually goes up against my skin or my shift, that lining I actually used kind of a sheer light 100% cotton linen. So I had all this extra linen. I was like, well, that's good. It'll be really breathable fabrics. And I decided to use silk thread because silk thread is fantastic, way better, I think, with hand stitching than using, say, a cotton thread. However, silk thread does break a lot easier. So if you pull on silk thread, it's way easier to snap the thread than if you just use a cotton thread. So that is my one morning. But I do much prefer to use silk thread when I am hand sewing. So the other element of this stay that I did is there are different kinds of boning that women would put in their stays. In the 18th century, though, one of the most accessible, especially for women in the colonies, for example, it was a lot more accessible and a lot cheaper for them to use reeds. So I actually used reeds boning. I had found some online from just a sutler. I don't remember the company, but I will look it up and I will put a link down below. they have lots of different things, especially for like stay making. So I got like a bunch of reeds boning and it was cheap. And so I was like, well, it's pretty historically correct. I don't know yet how exactly it'll hold up. I don't know how durable it will be. Because I did notice like I could just, snap them. But if I'm not bending my stay in half, I think it'll be fine. I'm also not using the metal eyelets for the corset back. So the metal eyelets are not as period correct, I don't think. So I'm actually going to hand stitch the eyelet holes. And I think it'll be kind of cool. So we'll see. I'm not finished with that part. I have to finish putting all the binding tape on the bottom, and then I can do the eyelet holes. I am going to show you a little bit of the process of making this stay because I did film it, but I also want to tell you a little bit about the history of stays. So there's not a whole lot of information to give. I mean, it's not like they necessarily, oh, I got to tell you all the history of all of my undergarments. They didn't do that. So really what we know is just what we have been able, historians and archivists and stuff have been able to gather from actually studying pieces of clothing, because people didn't really write about that. So we can see in, advertisements and things like that, what kinds of stays women were buying. So in the 18th century, the stays, a lot of them, for many years, they had this kind of style and look where it wasn't, it didn't change too drastically, because when you get to the 19th century, that's when they started to change drastically. This particular style of stay would be more of the 1770s. So colonial America, there's a lot of that style of stay that women would wear. And then you get to the end of the 1700s, then we start moving into the style of the Regency period. So if you know a lot about Jane Austen, and the style of the Jane Austen era, that would be the Regency period. So the style of clothing, the silhouette that was in fashion, was the higher empire waistline dresses. So they actually had the shorter stays. So the stays that women wore during the end of the 1700s and the beginning of the 1800s was shorter and much more like a modern bra today. And stays got their name because that's what they did. They made things stay. You catch my drift. After the Regency era, then you start to see stays starting to elongate again. Then when we're in the 1850s, 1860s, they're a lot closer to what is more commonly known as a stay today. So if you think of a stay, it will look more, most people think of Victorian corsets or stays. And that's a little more similar to what was worn by women during the American Civil War. Then you get to the Victorian era, and they were doing a lot more to fit their bodies to the shape and style that was in for the silhouette. So they actually would have a lot more support. And their corsets were elongated and even got to the point where they went down below the hips. Stays were an essential part of a woman's wardrobe for years because they didn't have a brassiere. And if you've seen Outlander, there's a great scene in the first season when Claire goes back and she's in the 1700s, and I can't remember her name, I think it's Miss Fitzgibbons or something. She is helping her undress and change into period correct clothes. And she's thinking that she's just in a shift. But then when she takes it off, she has a modern bra of the 1950s or 1940s, 1950s. So she's wearing this modern bra and she's like, what in the world is that? Yeah, they didn't have them. They didn't have underwear like we have today. It was totally different. So that's why a lot of what historians know about stays and undergarments and stuff that people wore is because they've just been able to study those kinds of things that have, survived throughout history. Because people didn't really write about their underwear. Like they were like, this is historically important. Fashion historians someday will love to know this information. They didn't do that. So that's why we don't know a whole lot from firsthand accounts. So everything we can learn is really just from studying the garments themselves. I'm going to show you guys a little bit of the video process of making my 18th century stay. It was a long process, and I did not film all my hand stitching, so sorry. Too bad, so sad. All right, so I hope that you enjoyed this little lesson in historical stay making. I post videos when I can, and I hope that you were able to learn something. Thanks so much for stopping by the Historian's Wardrobe YouTube channel. I'm Mariana, and I'll see you next time. Bye!